In firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. For over 20 years, the FireStore has equipped first responders with trusted gear featuring brands like MSA Carnes for helmets and Seek for thermal imaging cameras. Stay prepared. Visit thefirestore.com today. The FireStore, your trusted safety partner.
This podcast is brought to you by Flex 7 from TenCate Protective Fabrics. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology. Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tencatefabrics.com/Flex 7.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with Magnegrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit Magnegrip.com.
Taking it to the streets is all about advancing firefighter safety and operational integrity for the fire service. And now, the latest edition of Taking It to the Streets with your host, Christopher Naum.
Welcome to this edition of Buildings on Fire's Taking to Your Streets, on your street, in your city, across the country, and around the world. Taking to the Streets is a monthly radio talk show program on fireengineering.com, Blog Talk Radio, and I'm your host, Christopher Naum. As always, a heartfelt welcome to our dedicated, loyal listeners and those of you that are listening in for the first time. Taking to the Streets is all about advancing operational excellence, decisive fireground decision-making, talking about the importance and focusing in on the built environment and the direct applications on today's emerging firegrounds. So again, welcome to this edition of Buildings on Fire's Taking to the Streets. It's been an interesting year. This is our last program for 2025. And as we reflect back upon our previous 11 programs this particular season, it's interesting to note that we've had an opportunity to talk about a number of both emerging issues, talking about a number of focal points that are principal and specific to the built environment. And again, we focus on the built environment here on our program because it is all about today's fireground. When we talk about structural fireground operations, we talk about all of the various facets and influencers. It's certainly, and we can certainly challenge it, but it's certainly safe to say that one of the most important critical aspects on today's fireground is truly understanding the built environment, first and foremost, and more importantly, understanding that structure, that building, that occupancy that you are preparing or moving forward to engage upon based upon the incident at hand. Our program on this episode is really going to focus in on a couple of generalized items, but carrying on the theme that we've had over the last couple of episodes, talking about the importance of the first do. We talked about predictability of performance. We talked about a number of different generalized facets, and although we got into the weeds quite a bit about some of the first arriving construction tactics and safety, we've provided some emphasis and focal point on a couple of previous episodes talking about our model of predictability performance, the fact that all buildings truly are predictable in terms of their performance if we understand a number of key attributes in terms of their functionality, their design, the era and vintage in which they've been constructed, and certainly some of the other attributes that come out of that, along with the 5 fundamentals that affect all buildings and that revolve around, again, the features dealing with our roof systems and assemblies, perimeter walls, aspects of floor and or ceiling assemblies, understanding the characteristics of the compartment, and the 5th most important item dealing with our building characteristics is the absence and presence of voids. And we've talked quite a bit about those in our programs. Our focal point here as we finish off our program for this year is really going to be a simple term when we say the following, what's on your street and first do. And that really revolves back around the fundamentals and hopefully provides you with an opportunity here at the end of the year as we prepare to get into the beginning of the new year, an opportunity to reflect both internally and maybe reflect externally. And that external reflection really is what's out in front of the apparatus bays, what's out in front of the apron of the firehouse and the fire station when you make that turn, or whether you're going straight out of the apron and onto the street in a forward manner. But again, whether you're turning left, or whether you're turning right, or whether you're going straight, the built environment certainly has so much influence, but yet continues to be so understated, misunderstood at times, and I think neglected to a great degree, because we just are not spending nearly enough time focusing in on our first due, let alone our second due or mutual aid response areas, which are vastly just as important for those of you that are responding out and taking in work in mutual aid responses or greater alarms, but especially under automatic or mutual aid considerations. That in itself, especially when there's a degree of consistency in those responses, now you need to be making an effort, a very concerted effort, to understand and learn the first due response areas in your mutual aid and other department response locations. So there's certainly a lot to be said about it. And again, I think it's important to understand that you've got to really internalize the importance of understanding building construction, applying the study of building construction sciences. It's much more than just the 5 fundamentals of building construction, which far too often become the starting and stopping points. We learn a little bit about the 5 fundamentals, dealing with 5 classifications. We think that there are these other hybrid classifications, which there are not. The fundamentals are drawn out of the NFPA 220 standard. And again, we talk about occupancy types. And as we've mentioned here on our program, we talk about occupancy risks. They seldom resonate and extend into the intermediate, let alone the advanced, or certainly the upper advanced areas of study, comprehension, and application on the fire ground. And those are really the biggest things. I would say this for all of you here as we sort of roll out our year, and especially if you've had the opportunity to listen to our programs over the course of the last 12 months, both our programs as well as our other colleagues that are authoring and publishing and producing their webcasts and podcasts here on fireengineering.com. There's a wealth of information that is available to you, but you've got to commit time and energy, and really on a day-to-day type basis, in order to develop and maintain both building and fire literacy. And again, it's far more than the fundamentals that many of you have been exposed to, and it really does require a very pronounced degree of commitment throughout your career. But you've got to start at some point, and hopefully that starting point has taken place at some previous point. But if it's a part of listening to these programs, the readings that you may be taking in both online on fireengineering.com, through the publication, attending FDIC or other regional, state, or local level conferences, trainings, and seminars, there's such a vastness of opportunity of exposure. But more importantly, all of this really starts, guys, it starts with what's on your streets and in your first due just outside of that firehouse. And if you're not paying attention day in and day out on your shifts, going and coming from the firehouse on the volunteer side or on the career side, you've really got to pay attention to those conditions that are sometimes very subtle, that are sort of falling into the background noise of what's going on in your community, to those things that sometimes are right in front of you that are very evident, but we're not slowing down enough to take that in. We're not recognizing those particular conditions and aspects in order to provide insights from our operational perspectives. One of the important issues that you really need to address for all of us, and again, whether you're new to the job or old to the job, the critical importance of understanding the built environment, understanding what's out on your streets in your first due, certainly is first and foremost. If you do not have a good fundamental understanding of the day in and day out activities affecting your buildings, your occupancies, your first due, the subtleties of those things that sometimes are blending into the background. It almost becomes background noises. We're not paying attention. We're not recognizing that construction is being changed, or even just the day-to-day issues that are affecting all buildings relative to age and deterioration, along with the changes in occupancies, both subtle or dramatic, new construction that may be coming about. But again, those conditions that change the built environment, that truly influence operational decision-making and influence tactical deployments. Those are certainly all very, very important. And the need to internalize the importance of building construction and be able to apply both the study of building sciences, building construction, building sciences, the methods and the materials of construction to your routine, your day-to-day operation. And again, that really elevates you back up to a different level of both comprehension and the ability to be both building and fire literate. And that's one of the common themes that we've been discussing here throughout our programs, not only this past year, but certainly throughout all of our previous episodes over the last 10 plus years here on fireengineering.com. So a couple of different things. I'm going to get a few things here suited up. One of the things that I do want to make mention of here as we get into our program is the importance. So, we talk about, and I've mentioned this again in our previous episodes, we talked about the importance of some particular books and manuals and so forth that are out there. I would certainly, again, reinforce to all of you that in order to develop and maintain both building and fire literacy, there are some required readings that are out there. And certainly, first and foremost, one of the key non-fire service related resources that, again, I will make mention of here for all of you, that, again, if you have not obtained a copy of Francis Ching, Ching, Francis Ching's Building Construction Illustrated, it's a missed opportunity. It's certainly a required reading. It's something that, again, I obtained and utilized in my very early stages of academia when I was going to school to become an architect. And again, in our second semester, I just remember vividly. And again, it's on my shelf here in my office, as you can see over my shoulder. For those of you that are watching the webcast here, I do have a very, very comprehensive and extensive professional library, and I still have my 1975, my 1975 edition of Francis Ching's Building Construction Illustrated on that, along with all of the other subsequent editions. And again, all of these are available if you go online. There's a variety of resources that you can obtain them from. I will also say this, is that Wiley will be publishing, Francis Ching and Wiley, the publisher, will be publishing the newest edition coming out in early 2025. It's scheduled to come out in, I believe it's March of 2025, which will be the newest edition of Building Construction Illustrated. And I can't wait. I've already pre-ordered mine. But I would encourage you, if you have not obtained one of the previous editions, it's certainly a good economic item for those of you that might have some budgetary constraints as a starting point. But I would also encourage you, save some of your loose change, get that money off to the side, and put your order in or obtain it in the first quarter of 2025. Francis Ching's Building Construction Illustrated, the newest edition, will be coming out. The other three required readings that again, although I am not an advocate, nor do I really promote any of the other publications that are out there. There's a number of them, all of which have strengths and weaknesses. And I'll just say this, that obtain all of them. If you're able to develop and maintain a budget, which is really required of any company or commanding officer in today's fire service, you need to commit to developing your own personal professional library, both hard copy documents, as well as the readily accessible and available, as well as those things that are limited availability for online electronic documentation. You've got to develop that capability. You've got to develop your own personal library for those things that are important to you currently. And surprisingly enough, the kinds of information that you may be reverting back to as you promote up, as you get into new positions, as things change in your community, in your first due, as you change organizations, but certainly as you change positions of responsibility, it is of the utmost requirement for you to develop and really, I think for better words, to invest in that type of need for documentation, referencing. And I started off very early on in my career developing that particular need. It started out of academia. Again, just all of the academic books that normally would come about each semester began to fill up my shelves. But again, from my perspective, it was sort of twofold. As I was going through into the university in academia, I was getting my architectural engineering books, and being in my very early days of the volunteer fire service, again, I was developing my library of purchasing particular books that I became aware of, either through mentors or through publication promotions and so forth in the various trade journals of the time, or hearing about different authors and books by going to conferences and seminars, both regionally, statewide, and then more importantly on a national level. But it's very, very critical for you to obtain those. So again, the other three, along with Francis Ching's book and any other fire service related building construction book, of which there are a number out there, but I would encourage you to certainly get the most comprehensive books, and that is the NFPA Fire Protection Handbook, the Society of Fire Protection Engineers Handbook of Fire Protection Engineering, and certainly start investing and reading and becoming very literate in the lessons, learnings, and writings that are coming out of the NIOSH reports and documents that are out there. The other two books that, again, I would encourage you to obtain that are very, very useful in terms of your reference libraries, those would be inclusive of A Field Guide to American Houses and The American Homes by Lester Walker. So those are, again, two other books, the Field Guide to The American House by Virginia Savage McAllister, and The American Homes by Lester Walker are two other defining books that I would encourage you to pick up. So we talked a little bit about, as I started off talking about, what's on your street and what's on your first due. And, part of this goes back to, again, understanding the built environment, predictability, building performance, understanding some of the key elements and attributes that fall under those three categories of building, compartment, and company. And again, those are fundamental to our building facts model, first arriving, construction, tactics, and safety. If you don't know what's in your first due, both those things that are obvious, again, some of the residents, the types of occupancies that are out there, if you're not having relevant, balanced conversations regarding today's demanding fire ground, the emerging challenges that are coming about from the built environment that are part of your first due, both from the past, the current, and those things that are coming about in the future relative to changes and development and renovation activities, or again, some of the aspects dealing with age and deterioration. If you're not putting all of those things together and looking at the built environment, building sciences, lessons and learnings that are coming out of research, and the hard fireground lessons that are coming out of the various types of after action reports, the NIOSH reports, near miss event reports, and any of the other current or previous reports that have been that are available and accessible. But again, are we spending the time to go back and read and become literate and have that understanding? And again, are they aligning with your current departmental operations? More importantly, are those types of conversations, are you having them and aligning them with your current capabilities or limitations? Again, it's very, very important to have these conversations with others to try to determine and utilize others as sounding boards to sort of do a check and balance to see sort of where you're at. Do I have the right level of knowledge? Do I have this level of comprehension? Is there something that's out there? Again, it's safe to say this. I think it's important to recognize too that it is becoming more and more challenging to have the accessibility and the availability of downtime or dedicated time to focus in on these types of studies. It used to be pretty easy. You'd pick up a publication, you'd read through it at the firehouse, bring it home, or you have your home subscriptions, pick up the latest book and so forth. But there's such a continuing onslaught of continuing new information from a variety of sources, whether it be from the fire service standpoint or the ancillary professions and allied professions that are all part of our continuing education knowledge. It's just it's nearly impossible. So it is a continuing process, but it is something that has to be focused in. It has to be focused, dedicated, and it is a long-term related type of condition. One of the things that we've mentioned previously, talking about reads, risks, and actions, they all revolve around the predictability of that performance of your buildings. And when we talk about the reads, it deals with the building compartment and company. We talk about our risks. It's associated with RIT, dealing with resiliency, integrity, and time, both in terms of the built environment, also as it relates to human performance, dealing with our company and personnel capabilities. And then we talk about actions. So we talk about reads, we talk about risk, and we talk about actions. The actions fall under the acronym of SUG, severity, urgency, and growth. Pretty straightforward aspect of it. Again, all buildings are predictable, but what type of model are you utilizing? What kind of information are you bringing forward? And more importantly, how do I know what I don't know if I don't know it? And that's part and parcel to it. That first do, when we talk about being able to put a single or part of that first do box alarm assignment, putting eyes on the incident and on the building, conducting our size up assessment, our 360, our recon. But again, a lot of that falls under this whole aspect of we're trying to make assumptions, predictions, validations. What do we know? What kind of guesses do we have? What kind of recognition, prime decision making, naturalistic decision making from previous events do we have available to us that we are recalling based upon our size up or familiarity based upon runs to a particular building or occupancy? And sometimes that gut check, that whole aspect of what is it that we know based upon our previous experiences in either that building or similar structures and occupancies of which we're seeing some pattern recognition that are, again, that are assumed, predicted, validated, that we know, or those things that we sometimes are guessing. But we're trying to align, put these things together to give us a picture, to try to determine what our actions are going to be, provide some direction, establish our command decision making, or establish our influencing factors dealing with our decision making practices, and then go to work, right? Having that tactical mobility, tactical agility, and being adaptive toward those conditions. It's safe to say that, again, when we talk about some of those aspects in our previous, our last couple of previous episodes, we talked about some of the size up considerations, predictability of performance. But again, without going back into those size up items, we talked about some of the classical perspectives of Cole was wealth, dealing with what Chief John Norman from FDNY utilized that acronym for. That originally, as we talked about, the true origination of some of the attributes of that acronym, although not aligned with Cole was wealth, but some of the particular bullets that fall under that actually originated back in the 1930s in FDNY that are somewhat unsighted, but they correlate to some of the reference and researches that we've done over the last couple of years that actually bring the genesis of that back to that forefront. It's truly, when we talk about size up, again, we've talked about the aspects of size up really originating back in the defining book, that first edition and the first published textbook for the fire service dealing with firefighting operations. And that was the 1932 edition, the first edition of the Fire Chief's Handbook that was published by the International Association of Fire Chiefs. And then we should recognize and also know, when we talk about how size up and building reads, some of the aspects that are very classical and have been implemented throughout many organizations, but it certainly is a consistent methodology. When we talk about Lloyd Lehman's in his firefighting tactics book in 1951, 52, and 53, both his writings at FDIC and the first two books on firefighting tactics and the attack and extinguishment textbook, talking about facts, probability, own situation, resources, decision making, and developing the plan of attack. Those are all classical fundamental aspects toward our size up and considerations. When we talk about the process, again, there's variables. There's going to be those things that are sometimes superficial. Are we just checking the box? It's maybe sometimes really not being done when we talk about size up considerations. It's not really being done. We're just saying we're doing it. Sometimes it's beyond. It should be beyond what's obvious, critical, anticipated, refined, and meaningful. When we take a look at some of those particular aspects of those operations. We talk about some of the other elements there. Again, those both interior and exterior. There's the 360, the assessment, the size up. There's many different aspects. And again, to reinforce the 4 reads on the fire ground, we continue to advocate and profess that there are 4 primary reads on today's fire ground, dealing with reading the fire ground, reading the building, reading the compartment, and reading the company. And again, that whole aspect of human performance, one of the things that we introduced into the fire service a number of years ago, but tying back in that building compartment and company, and talking about some things that we originated and discussed and presented and moved forward to the fire service well over 15 to 20 years ago. So now it goes just back to, again, your first due. I'll say this, and again, this is one of the sort of a lead in. I'll talk about, all of this has to be much more than luck. When you're responding out and you're talking about, engaging in the various types of structures that are out there, there's a couple of things. You need to have pre-incident intel and knowledge and insights on that building before you first set foot on that fire ground or on that scene. That first arriving should not be the first time you're looking at that structure. Now, given the standpoint that in some instances, going on mutual aid or greater alarm assignments, you may not be familiar with that building. But if you're talking about your first due, it's unexcusable for you not to have building insights and intel on that structure if you've spent any amount of time in that house that first due area outside of the apron constitutes. So if it's something that you're not familiar with, then you're not doing your job and you're derelict. You need to be spending time either on shift during the conduct of activities that are formal as part of, let's say, a departmental drill activity or house or company drill, a captain's drill. And if it's not occurring in a formality under formal conditions of training, whether it be in-house, in-service, company, or departmental training, then it certainly needs to be things that you're initiating on your own, on your time. It has to be much more than just luck. And sometimes we get away with it, but it has to be something more than just that. So again, when we talk about some of those aspects, there's certainly a number of different operational challenges. I think some of the important aspects when we talk about operational challenges dealing with conventional tactical responses and operations, our residentials, large area residentials, mini and mega mansions, our multiple occupancy dwellings of a variety of types, both new and old. I believe that the garden apartment type of occupancy, the townhouse, the condominium type of structures, both large and small, in varying applications throughout the United States, have continued to have significant challenges both in older construction as well as newer construction features and layouts and configurations. I'm also advocating and of the opinion that, again, there continues to be an adverse issue dealing with operational parameters, dealing with row house firefighting of a variety of different occupancy types and usages and statuses. And that status may, again, whether it is an occupied structure that is a maintained occupied building, or certainly some of the challenges affecting an abandoned derelict building, an occupied derelict building, a derelict maintained building, which again, that in itself creates and identifies some very specific risks and hazards that should influence our decision making on the fire ground. The continuing trend dealing with podium construction, mixed use occupancies, the continuing issues that I believe are of an emerging standpoint, an adverse emerging issue dealing with our commercial occupancies, and predominantly those that are 30,000 square foot or less, But again, all commercial occupancies continue to nationally create some of these challenges that we are continuing to see. Just recently, within the last 24 hours, a commercial fire in the southeastern area of the United States. Again, some insights that were made available through social media and some online viewing of some video and audio clips. Again, shows a significant series of challenges that presented themselves during, bread and butter operations, conventional operations dealing with a commercial fire, that the conditions that evolved led themselves to a multiple alarm that created a significant series of cascading and challenges in operations. Modern retail service buildings, hybrid structures, adaptive reuse reutilization buildings, renovations, conversions, and alterations, and also the continuing issues along with podium construction, but the introduction and the continuing trend of institutionalizing both mass timber and, more importantly, institutionalizing CLT, and that is cross-laminate timber in hybrid type structures. So those are some of those aspects that are going to fall into it. So part of our operational challenges, either we have do we have a degree of confidence, discipline, rigor, fortitude? Are we competent? Are we skilled? Are we prescriptive? Are we adaptive, experienced, complacent, engaged, disengaged, distracted, irresponsible, fearless, fearful, and sometimes clueless? And it goes back to personal accountability. So this is I did this at a conference a number of years ago, and for better words, I'm just gonna present some of the aspects of this. And one of the things that we talk about, and this goes back to, again, how do I know what I don't know if I don't know it? Again, if I'm not exposed to some of these particular elements, developing our building and fire literacy aspects. But in this particular setting, I had everyone in the audience. So it was a fairly large statewide conference. I had everyone stand up in the room, and a mixture of rank and personnel. But it was interesting. This was sort of an opportunity to sort of see where we were, both in terms of visualization, because the outcome of this activity and experience is twofold. It was, one, based upon what was being asked, but the second part of this was what the results displayed, and that display was pretty substantial when we take a look at those that were standing. So I'm just going to do this as an opportunity here. I'm going to go through the bullets here, but think of it this way. And again, think of it from your perspective. If you cannot answer in the affirmative to the following series of bullets, it just takes a look at and provides a gauging of your own relevancy. Again, how do I know what I don't know if I don't know it? So I asked everyone to stand, and I instructed them to sit if they could not answer in the affirmative. And there were some caveats here based upon years of experience and company grade positions and command positions and so forth. But it was pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So I'm going to, let me just cue this up here for a moment. And again, just think of this from your perspective. If you're standing there, and at what point do you suddenly find yourself sitting down because you don't know? And part of that may be because of your newness to the fire service. It may be part and parcel due to the fact that you may not have been exposed to this information, either formally through training at the academy, through in-service training, through departmental training, through recruit school, wherever, and even in conferences and so forth. So if you are deliberately, with some degree of consistency, going out and attending both local, regional, state, or national conferences, and again, it depends on what your focal point may be in terms of subject matter and information and themes of those particular programs. But hopefully at some point in time, especially if you've been on the job for a period of time, and I don't want to qualify that or quantify that to too much of a degree, you should be aware, and what I'm going to ask here should not be completely alien. However, we have found that as I travel across the U.S., that nothing surprises me anymore, and it's certainly safe to say that at certain points through this series of questions, these bullets, that we end up finding the majority, greater than 90%, 95%, and sometimes almost 98 to 99% of those attending both large conference or small settings are sitting down well in advance of getting to the last bullet in the series of questions. So I'm going to run through it here and just think of yourself. And if you want to stand up and then sit down, but again, just think about at what point in the sequence of these questions do you end up sitting down because you don't know. And I'll start off with the first one. Having known who Chief Vinnie Dunn, Frank Brannigan, or Emmanuel Freed are or were. And sometimes I change it up. I'll throw in a couple of other individuals. It's interesting to note the late Chief Alan Brunacini, again, who passed away a number of years ago, continues to, not just only him, but there are numerous individuals that continue to fade into history because of their lack of either relevance or the lack of exposure of their writings, learnings, and who they were back in a, sometimes even in a short period of time. So even some of these items here are very interesting because not a lot of elapsed time has occurred, and it's interesting to note that some individuals are clueless. So again, I'll just indicate through the first bullet here, know who Chief Vinnie Dunn, know who Chief Vinnie Dunn, Frank Brannigan, or Emmanuel Freed are or were. If you did not know them, you would sit down. So again, for each one of the others as I go through here, we would be purging and sort of calling that room of audience, and in either singular or large groups of individuals, people would sit down. So these are things that primarily you need to have literacy and both building fire and historical literacy of. You need to know who these things are in today's fireground operations. So second bullet, have read any building construction textbook, whether it be Brannigan, Dunn, Smith, an ISTA book, NFA book, NFPA book, and any book on building construction. And that does not necessarily have to be a fire service related book. Have taken at least a 12-hour building construction class, or some class on engineering, sciences, fire protection engineering, and so forth. So if you have not taken a 12-hour or greater class, and I use the 12-hour class because one of the most common 12-hour classes that have been readily available, and even to the point that it continues to be readily available online through the National Fire Academy's online self-paced learning, is the most fundamental training module, which goes back all the way to 1982, and that was the building construction series, both parts 1 and parts 2, dealing with wood frame and ordinary construction, and then the second part of that series dealing with non-combustible and fire-resistant construction. Again, they're readily available. It's greater than a 12-hour element, but for many of you out there, you're lucky if you get a couple of hours a year of formal building construction training. So again, we would take a look at where they're at. So so that's the third bullet. So fourth bullet, have read any contemporary book on fireground tactics or command leadership. Next item, have read at least, and I use the X number, and I'll say this: have you read at least 3 NIOSH reports? And again, a lot of that's based upon grade and rank and organization. But if you have not read, personally have not read at least 3 NIOSH reports, again, I'm challenging you. So unless you just got into the fire service within the last 60 or 90 days, and even with that, I would expect, and I've seen this more of recent than in the past, but more recently over the last few years, again, based upon our national travels and lecturing, many probationary classes and schools, recruit schools, are also integrating within their curriculum various activities in which individuals or group activities of the recruits in their academies are reading NIOSH reports and bringing that information back and reporting out as part of their recruit schools, which is phenomenal. I can't stress that enough. So, and I've utilized that in some of our longer multiple day session programs where we're doing a class in-house. We'll actually assign groups within our seminars to read a series of NIOSH reports of their choosing. There's normally a list, And this is something you guys could do in your own department as a part of your company or command level training, or even just in terms of your in-house drills, whether it be in service or on the volunteer side, just your drill activities. Get for your chief officers, give your company officers an assignment or in a grouping of a particular NIOSH report that might be pertinent, that ties into your community, your response areas, similar buildings, close calls that you may have had, and so forth, that ties in, that they can go out, read the reports, gain the insights, bring some of those insights back in terms of a report, formal report, either to a group, to the company, to the department in a training capacity, but report that back out. And then more importantly, be able to apply the lessons, learnings, and the challenges affecting that report to that first due area, to your department, whether it be first due, second due, but again, apply it back to your department in terms of vulnerabilities, risks, or things that you've done to limit a potential reoccurrence or history repeating event in your particular area that may have occurred somewhere else. So that was the next bullet. The next one, again, have read any of the Charleston SOFA Superstore reports, whether it be the Routley report from 2008, the NIOSH report from 2009, or the NIST report from 2011. Have read a classical book on fire tactics and operations, and that book would be inclusive of the authors of such as Freed, Kimball, Clark, Lehman, or Walsh as an example. Next bullet, can provide best practices and benchmark of time, T plus time for today's fire ground. And that revolves and reverts back to some of the things that we've talked about. And I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to tell you what the best practices may be, because we actually talked about it on our Facebook pages, on social media. I've had a number of rather lengthy posts talking about best practices, talking about tactical windows and what that elapsed time is. So if you don't know what the best practice for benchmark of time, T plus time is on today's fire ground, research that back out. Go back to a couple of our other programs that are available in the archives here on fireengineering.com and find out what I'm talking about. And if you're not sure, send me an email. I'll be happy to give you some insights on that. Next bullet, can provide an executive summary or a correlation of the heat release rate, megawatts of energy, dealing with the sustained deliverability of gallon per minute flow rates for today's fires. In other words, what is the targeted sustainable gallon per minute flow rate based upon megawatts of energy, based upon the correlating insights coming out of research from UL and NIST and from the Institute dealing with fires in our compartments. And again, if you don't have some insights on that we've been talking about, that the fire service has been talking about for the last 10 years, again, that just shows you sort of where you're at as a benchmark. Next bullet, know anything about the Howard County, Maryland 2018 line of duty death, or the Fresno, California near miss from 2015. Next bullet, can provide learnings from the wall bombs FDNY fire from 1978, or the Hackensack Ford fire from 1988, or the Chicago double line of duty death that occurred in 2010. So again, the correlating insights from those three events. And then we get into some more I think more advanced level items. So the last three bullets are pretty straightforward. And again, we actually started losing the majority of our individuals sitting down when I asked the question about reading NIOSH reports. That becomes a very critical element. It's just surprising that this day and age we don't have command and chief officers and company officers with a number of years under the belts that have not read at least a minimum of 3 NIOSH reports. So the last 3 are pretty straightforward. If you have a copy of the NFPA handbook or the Society of Fire Protection Engineers handbook, if you don't, we ask you to sit down. And then the last 2 have a copy of Francis Ching's Building Construction Illustrated. And then the last one, which again I put in there sort of as a testament to firefighting back in the day. The last question, have read or have a copy of report from Engine Company 82, going back all the way to the mid 1970s. So again, report from Engine Company 82. I've got a number of copies up on my shelf, but a great book if you've never read it or have never heard of it. It was interesting. I was just out in Vermont doing a full day session out there for the Vermont Fire Academy and for the fire service throughout the state, as well as representation of firefighters from throughout the New England area. And also I had a great brother firefighter who came out of one of the provinces in Canada who came down into Vermont and was attending the class. But it was interesting because I talked about, and we had everybody actually stand up for this particular program, and it was a pretty straightforward item. I said, again, so who, a simple question out to the audience, who does not know or has never heard of Report from Engine Company 82? And there were a number. There was a sizable number. And so for one of the newest firefighters who actually had just gotten into the volunteer department, he'd only been in for, I believe, about a week's time frame. That individual got a copy of Report from Engine Company 82. If you've never heard of that book, again, I would encourage you to look it up online, purchase it. You can probably get it in a couple of days here after the holidays. But Report from Engine Company 82 by Dennis Smith, an exceptional book that really pays homage to our job, to the fire service in terms of our legacy, our tradition, and it's as relevant today as it was back in the day when it was first published. So again, this all goes back to, again, how do I know what I don't know if I don't know it? So some interesting attributes. So one of the most critical elements here, again, is getting out into your first due. And again, it takes time, deliberate effort, especially if you're watching new construction. New construction, the phasing of construction does occur over an extended period of time, but it's never late in the process. You got to play catch up a little bit when you're trying to watch some of the construction. But if you're seeing ground preparation and occurring, and again, as the construction phases occur over the periodicity in which that building, whether however simple or complex it may be, sometimes the phased activities may expand over 4, 6, or 8 months, maybe a year, sometimes upwards of multiple years. And that, again, each phase of construction, as different things go on, from ground preparation, foundations, to getting the framework up and closing the building and weatherizing it, and then starting to work on the interiors in terms of compartments, systems, and all of the other elements that go into our buildings. Again, ultimately, you need to develop that intimate understanding of the built environment and understand to be able to project and identify strengths and weaknesses based upon the workmanship, based upon the methods and materials of construction that are going into that particular building. And this is also very, very true when we talk about renovations, alterations, adaptive reutilization of our buildings. There's just so much wealth of information that you can obtain. And it's not just that. Again, you just got to be driving around looking at your structures. So for some of you, you're paying attention based upon the activities and based upon, again, the frequency of engagement and looking at your structures and operations. And for others, again, if you don't have that frequency and demand of responses and operations, you may not be seeing what's going on. You may not be aware of the pulse of your first due until you're arriving at curbside and beginning the engagement process. So again, we have to have building intel both pre-incident as well as what we're going to be obtaining during the course of that incident. And there's a whole series of cascading attributes that come out of that. We're not going to get into that discussion, but I cannot stress enough about how important it is for you to spend time both on and off shift, on and off duty, whether it be as part of an official activity of your company, of your department, of your organization, your station, or the things that you will do on an independent basis to go out there and look at your buildings. So it's safe to say, when we talk about, again, understanding what's in your streets and in your first due, again, sometimes we talk about our built environment. There may be dynamics occurring, or very, very, very well may be very static, right? We talk about the local, the regional first due. It's the things that are outside your door that are really form the fabric of your community. Sometimes it's simple, sometimes complex, sometimes overwhelming, right? Localized, limited, expansive, constant or subtle changes, slow or rapid change. Sometimes these things may be indistinguishable in terms of what may be occurring, may be unrecognizable, or sometimes they are right smack in front of you that, again, are going to provide those types of insights. And again, when we take a look at, I think it's safe to say when we talk about localized, limited, or expansive, constant, subtle, slow, or rapid. And I think the thing that affects many of us is that when we have very slow change, we are not seeing some of the subtleties that are so important that we need to recognize that are part of those reads to understand and have a pulse of that built environment. When we see new construction, that's pretty straightforward, right? It's right in front of us. But again, are we paying attention? We've got another building going up, and some first dues may be very complex. There may be significant layers of a variety of structures. For others, it may be pretty straightforward, very simple. It's not overwhelming. It's straightforward relative to construction era vintages that are very recognizable, identifiable. You have a pretty good feeling for the operations and those particular conditions. But if you are not paying attention to the subtleties, if you're not paying attention and spending time at some point on or off shift to observe and engage with the workers, the site supervisors, just the owners of an addition or of a coming soon, something's changing relative to a building and occupancy, that whether it be on Main Street, a standalone at some particular corner, wherever that building may be, large, small, or indifferent. Again, there may be some key building intel and information that you can obtain either officially or unofficially on or off the job that may make a difference in that response to that building down the road or to a similar building in your community in your first due that's going to provide maybe a different tactical edge towards your operations. They all, again, are going to provide some definition and influences to your operational protocols, different levels of risk, the tactics that may be employed, structural fire engagement, the type, the scope of firefighting, the life safety, the mitigation, what side of the curve you're on regarding that type of built environment, and again, the applications towards your operations. You really need to have this type of insight, formally or informally. Hopefully you're developing pre-fire plan information and data. If not, sometimes the most simplest related conditions, again, knowing your first due and getting out on your streets, having curbside conversations, having your kitchen table conversations and discussions, walking tours, building performance and risk, those kinds of information and insights. But the walking tours, let me take a moment here to talk a little bit about some of those related conditions. When we take a look at some of those aspects of walking tours, and they fall right in line with some of the things that we have been doing quite consistently over the last number of years, but are reading the buildings, walking tours and curbside conversations. It is part of our taking the classroom out into the streets, where when we talk about building instruction, it's really important to have that formal classroom type setting, but what better place to have learning opportunities but in the streets. So one of the things that we have been doing over the last number of years, both in conference settings, but also contracting and working directly with specific fire departments and organizations throughout the United States and internationally. We did our first walking tour actually up in Nova Scotia this past year here in 2024 as part of a conference setting up in the Halifax region. And part of the class started in the formality of the classroom setting, and we took out our 50 attendees and walked the streets of that community in that immediacy of where the conference was being held, and talked about the buildings going up and really having the ability to look in a three-dimensional standpoint, the building, the structures, the siting, reading the fireground, reading the building, having appreciation for the compartment, projecting, anticipating, predicting fire flow, fire-related conditions relative to fire behavior, fire flow requirements, building stability, resilience, integrity, and time, collapse potential. It's one thing to talk about bulging walls and taking a look at masonry walls or even frame construction in terms of adversity or deficiencies. It's an entirely different perspective when you're in the street looking at that in a three-dimensional real-world capacity, and taking a look at the degrees of configuration and those types of settings, and then also talking about them and how they might be different in terms of what we're observing daytime versus nighttime operations. So I would encourage you to think about, and I'll just say this, that we do bring our programs in nationally throughout the United States, where we do our reading the buildings classes, formality of a classroom setting, and then we talk about size up, and it's all part of our reading the buildings programs, size up, building facts modeling. But the formality of taking a structured taking a class and providing a structured walking tour, looking at the buildings, talking about construction. We were the first to bring this forward in the United States a number of years ago, going back almost 14 to 15 years, if not greater, on a national level. But we were the first to conceive that idea. Started off on a local basis, but we were the first to actually present that at national training programs throughout the United States, and now is a very common presentation for that type of thing. So you can also do that. I mean, again, get your companies out there, walk the streets of your first do, but hopefully have some insights on the construction. The worst thing you could do is go out there, talk about some things, and not have the technical basis, both technical accuracy of what it is that you're identifying and presenting or lecturing upon in terms of what it is that you're looking at. So it's important for whoever is presenting or facilitating these lectures and tours that you have a firm foundation and technical accuracy of building construction to be able to apply it. It's also safe to be able to go out and conduct these with some limited insights, but again, do not run the risk of presenting inaccurate information that may be taken verbatim and then being applied to the fire ground inaccurately during fire ground operations that potentially may lead to an adverse outcome. So I'll just be politically correct to leave it at that, but just be aware that there's some limitations and challenges regarding the technical accuracy of information. But I also, on the plus side, would encourage you to get your companies out there. If you're not doing that at all hours of the day, it's one thing to do it during the daytime hours, during the comfort of good weather and so forth. It really is a testament when you're getting your companies and personnel out and doing these walkthroughs, again, maintaining the balanced level of risk, maintaining safety relative to what can go wrong, because it is a higher level of risk. But during nighttime operations or inclement weather, again, think about challenges. You may be showing up on scene, and think about it in this fashion. It's very easy and still challenging to identify and read some of those things that are so obvious under good weather conditions. But think about the cloak of darkness and the adversity of smoke, the obscurity level of conditions and so forth, reflection, refraction of lighting that's playing off of smoke density and smoke particles and glass and other reflective conditions and so forth, and trying to read and identify and pick up on some subtleties and some very important critical building reads that may be there. So there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of abilities here to develop both initial basic level insights and observation skills, intermediate, advanced, and then certainly a whole cascading series of advanced levels that really go beyond the obvious. And that's part of the challenge, going beyond what's obvious, being able to take a look at those particular elements, take a look at construction system, occupancy type, occupancy risk, considerations dealing with collapse and compromise, having some considerations dealing with fire dynamics and the fire behaviors, and the methods and materials of construction. Those are the 5 fundamentals that are part of our domain. We talk about building construction, and then looking at, again, the enclosures, the perimeter walls, roof systems, floor systems, ceiling systems, the aspects of the compartment characteristics, and identifying the absence or presence of voids. Those are the 5 and 5 that are critical to assessing the buildings, looking at building performance, understanding those levels of risk and those other considerations. So daytime, nighttime, it's just safe to say that, again, the built environment is developing faster with greater complexity, greater hazards, and greater risk to firefighting than the tactical models are providing for. And the only way to gain that insight, both in terms of understanding historical precedences of construction, as well as emerging design and technologies, to go out there in your streets and take a look at the influence of building construction and how it's going to potentially influence directly or indirectly fire ground decision making, and operations, and it's inherently fundamental. Again, do not dismiss it. It's more often than not neglected. It's misunderstood, misapplied, and sometimes misapplied erroneously. We've got to develop this functional degree of literacy. And today's fireground is directly aligned to three integrated domains. Those include the building, the compartment, the company. Neglecting any single one or more diminishes the fireground capabilities and a positive outcome over the delta time standpoint. So it's important to put those together. I think it's also safe to say that we'll just reinforce that when we take a look at these things that one can attain. Again, building facts first arrive in construction, tactics, and safety. They directly correlate all facets on today's fireground, directly influenced by the delta time factors. And again, fireground performance indicators, those reads when applied accurately and timely, again, will define with a high degree of probability tactical deployments and those operations for your fireground. So again, we've got to be able to put those things together in a direct standpoint. Fireground assessments and size up is a continuous fluid process at varied strategical and tactical levels, both on the fireground and within the building. So trying to put those together for that particular standpoint. So again, I'm encouraging you to have a resolve going into the new year. Again, internalize the importance of building construction. Take a look at the facets that we've provided some insights on over the course of our episodes this past year. We had an exceptional series of programs that we started off in the latter part of 2013, or excuse me, in 2023, talking about the commercial fireground. We rolled off and finished off those episodes in the early part of the first quarter here of 2024. And those operational insights, again, will give you some of those particular aspects. We talked about size up, we talked about construction. Again, take some time to look at some of our previous offerings from our episodes here in 2024, as well as our other colleagues that, again, are providing some exceptional insights here on fireengineering.com on the podcast series. There is a great wealth of information that collectively can be all put together here. It's not just our program, but all of the programs, along with the readings, along with the offerings, along with the rich multimedia and other exceptional resources that are available across the entire gamut of fire engineering materials, both in terms of Fire Engineering Magazine, the online information, and so forth, that will help really give you some good insights going forward. So again, I think it's important to say that the simplest thing here for all of you is just start spending time in your streets. Take a look at target hazards that, again, is it a vacant structure? Is it a derelict building? Is it a building that's changing its occupancy or usage? Is it a building or a large vacant commercial structure or complex that has been ignored for sometimes years or decades of time that, again, has just sort of been taken for granted? And there are numerous events that have occurred over periods of time across the United States. Again, I've been very fortunate to have traveled extensively throughout the U.S. and certainly just this past year, having worked with many organizations, both large and small, from metro size to small rural size volunteer organizations, and with limited resources. But again, working and presenting some exceptional classes on building construction. So first and foremost, again, when we take a look at moving into 2025 in terms of a resolve and a resolution, but just, again, maybe a check and adjust and refocusing, commit to some things. Again, the bullet listing that we have. If you're not familiar with something, if you've not read the NIOSH reports, if you've not picked up a classical book on building construction, if you have not opened up any pages, go to your library, go to other avenues where you might have, whether it be the departmental library or other resources, both online or in the physical standpoint. Take a thumb through some books and resources that are available, both fire service and non-fire service. Go to your community colleges, go to your public libraries, go to the architectural section, go to the engineering section, and take a look at some books that are non-fire service related that talk about building construction. Start getting knowledgeable, start developing that literacy. Get a copy of Francis Ching's Building Construction Illustrated. It'll be well worth the investment of funds to start understanding the built environment, understanding construction, far more than what has been presented, I think, in terms of our modeling. We actually do have a class that we've put together. We actually rolled out last year, which changes up the modeling on what it is that we should be studying and how we should be studying. And again, I don't want to indicate anything negatively to the FESHE model for academia in terms of 2- and 4-year college level programming, the type of subject matter that is being presented in both the textbook and in the curriculums. But I will also challenge all organizations by saying that a lot of that information has become outdated. It's being misapplied. More importantly, we are not applying enough time in a variety of subject areas, of which building construction, building sciences, and engineering, both structural, regular engineering, fire protection engineering attributes, are not having enough time spent on them. We do not commit anywhere nearly enough time on the building and engineering sciences that the fire service is in demand of to apply to today's fire ground. And we'll leave that discussion to another episode and time. Get your companies out into the streets. Take the opportunity to observe, take a look at your buildings, study, ask questions, seek out information that you may not have information of or have readily available. If you don't have the technical in-house expertise, seek it out. It's pretty simple. Feel free to give me a holler, send me an email, drop me a line. I'm more than happy to give you some assistance to help guide you personally on your professional development and growth. Certainly our other programs here on fireengineering.com, on our Blog Talk Radio, certainly on our series on Buildings on Fire, Taking the Streets, will provide that wealth of information, as well as a number of other great podcasters and other colleagues and instructors that are here on this program, as well as others throughout the industry. So I don't want to say that it's always limited just to those that are involved in this organization and in this type of branding, but it's safe to say that there is a wealth of leadership across the United States with some very good, competent individuals. I would be wary of those that do not have the technical basis, that we have a lot of anecdotal information that continues to be spread. And it's interesting to sit on some conferences and settings and hear the presenter get into some conversations. And unfortunately, it's just more often just anecdotal, opinionated, and in some instances just blatantly technically inaccurate. But it's difficult and challenging at best to get into some challenges out there, but we'll figure out how that all works out at some other point in time. Take a look at opportunities to reach out to us if there's anything that we can personally do. We've got a number of scheduled programs throughout the United States. We've got FDIC coming up in April 2025. You can take a look at a number of scheduled events throughout the U.S., and I'll be doing quite a few presentations rather extensively throughout the United States, from East Coast to West Coast, North to South, from the Midwest up into the Providences, and also some international programs that are coming up. But certainly, chances are you can see some of our programs, see some of my programs direct in person. And we've got an exceptional array of some other things that are being finalized here as we get into the early beginnings of next year. But again, here on Fire Engineering's platforms, some things that'll be rolling out that'll be part of a multimedia series, part of an expanded podcast program. We're going to do a little bit of rebranding here on our Buildings on Fire, Taking the Streets podcast program and webinar series. We're going to offer some additional resources that are going to be supplemental. We're looking to provide some free monthly accessible, for better words, kitchen table type programming, where we're going to set up a a number of scheduled events on a monthly basis, where we are going to open that up to a conversation across the United States and talk about the built environment, talk about construction, talk about tactical operations. But we're going to talk about buildings, talk about construction, talk about the first due, and do that to allow and facilitate dialogue, discussion, both with a number of series of guests. But look forward to seeing those announcements in the early part of 2025, early part of January. I've got a cohort series coming up, which will be an expanded program for some very concentrated training. It'll be offered online, and that'll culminate with a walking tour in New York City. That'll sort of be the capstone of that particular training series. So keep an eye out for some of those items. And again, take a look at some of the advertisements coming out here very early in 2025. They're already starting here on fire engineering, dealing with FDIC, the pinnacle training program throughout the United States, the North Americas, and internationally. We're talking about FDIC International. We'll be presenting a classroom session. And again, take a look at those dates once they're finalized. We will be conducting some podcasting live from the floor of the convention center, and look forward to some other things that are in the works here. So 2025 is shaping up to be an exceptional year on a variety of different levels, some publications, some online multimedia opportunities, some new things coming about, and a bunch of good stuff. So again, I want to thank all of you for listening in. I'll also say this, I actually would neglect it to sort of bring this up, and I've got a sort of a quick little list here that I put together. The month of December is certainly a challenging period throughout the United States on an annual basis. When we take a look at historical events, the sacrifices that typically have been made that are reflected by the incidences and the historical context of events that have occurred in previous years, it's important for us to take time to honor the sacrifice of our brothers and sisters that have lost their lives in the conduct of their duty in a variety of building types throughout the years. So, and there's many. There are numerous series of events. I'm just going to name a few of them here that should be on your radar screens. One of which we had the opportunity to do a podcast on a few years ago, and actually did 3 podcasts. One in particular, which was episode number 1710. So if you go back into the archives here, but one of the episodes, and again, all of these that I'm going to list out here quickly have a significant degree of relevancy. If you've never heard of them, take time to do some research. There's NIOSH reports, there's after action reports, U.S. Fire Administration reports, and so forth. And in some instances, some very robust and very in-depth multimedia offerings that, again, I just alluded to. One of which we had the opportunity to talk to some individuals that had some firsthand insights. But one of those events that the anniversary, as you're listening to this program, the anniversary of December 28th, for an event that occurred in 1988 that resulted in 5 line of duty deaths of a first due responding aerial tiller piece truck company that occurred in Buffalo, New York, dealing with a propane explosion for a warehouse facility in a building of type 4 construction. So there's 3 episodes, episodes 1710, 1692, and 1699 for the North Division Street fire that occurred on December 28th, 1988, 5 line of duty deaths. And I'll just run through these real quickly here. But again, if you have never heard of them, I would encourage you to take some time to do some research, provide some reflection and application of what the sacrifices were, the building types, the conduct of operations, and how they may apply to your response area. FDNY, 3 line of duty deaths in the borough of Brooklyn, December 18th, 1998. Wind-driven fire, 10-story high-rise, the Vandalia Avenue fire, again, a very important fire, 3 line of duty deaths, wind-driven conditions. The Keokeo, Iowa, 12/22, 1999, 3 civilian children, 3 firefighter line of duty deaths, residential fire, NIOSH report F2000-04. Chicago, Illinois, NIOSH report F2010-38, occurred on December 22nd of 2010. Double line of duty death in a vacant commercial structure of type 3 construction built in 1926 resulted in 2 line of duty deaths in a building of bowstring truss construction. So again, a very very specific historical contexting type of assembly, system, insights, and so forth. We actually wrote extensively on that subject in 2010, shortly on the heels of that event, to reintroduce to the American Fire Service that had not talked about bowstring trusses for a considerable period of time, but again, provided some very poignant learnings within that early days of that event in 2010. Going back historically to 1910, December 22nd of 1910, 22 firefighter line of duty deaths. The Chicago Union Stockyard Fire, very historical event, again from 1910. Kansas City, Missouri, battalion chief working in a paper warehouse fire. Again, one of the earliest NIOSH reports. This occurred on December 18th of 1999. The NIOSH report F99-48, and then the 4 line of duty deaths that occurred in Brackenridge, Pennsylvania, commercial building fire, U.S. Fire Administration report TR-061, and that occurred on 12/20 of 1999. So just a couple of items that came about here as we were putting our program together here. And again, we talk about all of these buildings in the first due, especially when we talk about the issues occurring with the propane explosion in 1998. Very, very specific things that led to a lot of insights dealing with the response to gas odors and other related conditions dealing with explosions. And if you've never heard this report, or again, go back to the archives here in fire engineering, and you can listen to the episode that we provided that had some firsthand accounts of that report from one individual in particular that was a early firefighter that went on to be a commissioner of the fire department. So we'll just leave it at that. Some great insights on that. So again, thank you very much for all of you that have been spending time investing in our program over the course of not only this year, any of the previous years, but that continue to invest in hearing some of our advocacy, our lessons, our learnings, some insights that we continue to provide. As I've always stated, building construction is as fundamental to structural firefighting as water is to fire suppression. If you don't understand your buildings, if you don't understand your first due, you're derelict, you're not doing your job, and you're just playing the odds. So again, take some time to reflect, and if there's anything we can do to help you develop your building and fire literacy, please reach out to me personally, and I'd be more than happy to provide some assistance. We got a lot of great things in store for you in 2025 as we move into the next opportunity here on FireEngineering.com, on Blog Talk Radio, and in the realm of the fire engineering stable of programs, both online, our publications, and certainly hope to see many of you at FDIC in April of 2025. So until next time, companies are in quarters and off the air. Stay safe, but keep in mind there's a job being worked somewhere in the streets in your city, across the country, and around the world, doing what we do best and being who we are, and that's firefighters. So stay safe. Thank you very much for attending and listening in on this edition of Buildings on Fire's Taking to the Streets. I'm your host, Christopher Naum. Thanks again. We'll see you next time around.
In firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. For over 20 years, TheFireStore has equipped first responders with trusted gear featuring brands like MSA Carnes for helmets and Seek for thermal imaging cameras. Stay prepared. Visit TheFireStore.com today. The FireStore, your trusted safety partner.
This podcast is brought to you by Flex 7 from TenCate Protective Fabrics. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology. Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tencatefabrics.com/Flex 7.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with Magnegrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit Magnegrip.com